everybody, welcome back to the Streaming Masterclass. Today we're talking all about using your actual camera as your streaming camera. So whether or not you just recently upgraded from a webcam to an actual camera, something like this, or maybe you're thinking about it, this video is for you. We're gonna go from the very beginning all the way to the end, set up a camera from start to finish, and we're gonna take a look at the difference, just so you can see what all the fuss is about. And of course, every Streamer Masterclass is powered by StreamBeats. It's the music you're listening to right now. If you're new to streaming and you're looking for copyright-free music that's safe to play on your streams and in your videos, StreamBeats is free, completely free, and it's safe. And I can vouch for that because, well, it's mine. I made it. If you go to streambeats.com, right now we're actually working on a brand new website, but the links right there to the two most popular streaming services are there. If you use Spotify, click the Spotify logo. If you use Apple Music, you click the Apple Music logo. It'll take you to the list of playlists. We got like 16 genres, over 1,600 tracks. Yeah, link to StreamBeats down below in the description. Let's jump into mirrorless cameras. Why do people even use a mirrorless camera when you can get a webcam now, a really good webcam for like 100 to 150 bucks? Well, a couple reasons. The first reason is pretty obvious. You're gonna have a superior image quality. It's just physics. You can't take a camera like this and get it to look as good as glass and equipment as big as this. It's just, sometimes bigger means better. And also times better means better and more expensive means better. Anyway, these are just better cameras than cheap little webcams. Also, another big reason is the choice of lens. You have a lot more flexibility when it comes to one of these cameras. When you buy a webcam, you're kind of stuck with the image that they chose for you, but I can get whatever I want on this thing. And lastly, if you want to do some really cool stuff, you can kind of pull a Casey Neistat and do the whole, reach forward and zoom in if that's and what you fancy. And then I would say the last reason is it gives you more flexibility to make other content outside of streaming. So when I'm done streaming, I want to go shoot a video, I can pull this camera right off the little mount there, and I can go outside and I can shoot something fun with it, which is something that I think a lot of people should do. But let's jump into this here. What are you gonna need? Well, the first thing you're gonna need is obviously a camera, and you're going to need a capture card, something to plug the camera into the computer. The most popular one is obviously the Elgato Camlink. It's kind of the OG camera capture card, but not a lot of people know this. You can use pretty much any capture card. This is just a simplified capture card with just an HDMI input and a USB output. There are also simpler, cheaper ones if you don't need as many features. For example, while the Camlink is usually about $90 to $100, there's this one from a reputable company called Condor Blue. This is, I want to say $40, but it only does 1080/60. So if that's all you're going for anyway, get it for less than half off. But if you're looking for 4K, that's what the options are for. Another thing you'll need is a constant power supply, a way to power your camera so it won't die a couple hours into your live stream. Some of you stream for a very long time. Most common way people do this is something called a dummy battery, something like this that plugs into your camera and a cable comes out through the bottom, and you plug this into an iPad power supply, anything with USB-C charging, and your camera should last as long as you can. Some cameras nowadays, you won't need to buy something like that. You can just plug it straight into the USB right in the camera. That's actually what I'm doing with this one up here. But some cameras tend to overheat when you do that. So be aware of your camera if it has some overheating issues, and maybe if it does, you might have to go with a dummy battery. The last thing you need to consider, and one of the most common questions I get when talking about this topic, is what camera should I get? And a lot of it's up to you. It has to do with price, has to do with feature set. I use Lumix. Primarily, I use this to shoot all my YouTube videos, and I'm using it right now, almost this exact camera. This is the Lumix S5 II. This is the S5 IIX. They're basically the same thing, but there are two main reasons that I choose this one to live stream. First is that it's got a nice little fan ventilation system, so it will never overheat. The second thing is it shoots in something called open gate. It shoots extra tall. You get some extra vertical resolution. I'm going to demonstrate that for you in OBS a little bit later, but basically if I want to capture both horizontal and vertical content at the same time, that's kind of, well, whatever the opposite of a deal breaker is. It's a necessity, a prerequisite for me. That's the word I was looking for. When it comes to choosing a lens, we will talk about that a little bit later, but let's jump into OBS. Let's plug this thing in and let's set this thing up, because I just reset this camera today. We're gonna start from scratch. All right, camera number 2 is plugged in, and you can see it's not a great look right now for numerous reasons. One, of course, being just the bad angle, but other than that, still lots of problems we got going on here. But I'm gonna give you 30 seconds to look back and forth between these two cameras and really examine what the differences are, well, I thank the sponsor of today's video, Owned.pro. If you're looking to get started streaming and you feel a little bit overwhelmed, a lot of things to figure out, Owned.pro is a great way to simplify and speed up the process. By signing up for Owned.pro, you're getting access to over 10,000 different assets, stream elements, overlays, widgets, alerts, anything you need. Not only do you have the control to move them around your scene and place them wherever you want, but you can also change the color and customize a lot of them however you want. They also have a lot of little features for speeding up the process of setup. Things like once you add your social media handles in once, they apply to all the other places where social media handles might exist. This means you can set everything up in seconds and then customize as you'd like in the future. And the options are endless. You can upload your own assets. You can create things from scratch. You can modify the ones that are already in there. It's so easy and quick to set up a live stream on Own.pro. I will link to it down in the description below. Thank you guys again for sponsoring this video. All right, so let's get started. First thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to remove this so we can actually start from scratch here. So we got nothing in here. We got the camera, it's plugged into the capture card, but we have no camera in our OBS. Where do we go? So first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a source. We're going to do video capture device. We're going to call it my camera, something simple. We're going to add it in, and I have it plugged into my Elgato Camlink Pro HDMI 2. This will be where you find your capture card, whatever you're using. So whether it's Elgato Camlink 4K, the Condor Blue, and whatever it is, this is mine. I think I said 2. I'm actually using 4. Now, sometimes it just gets the right resolution for you, but I want to make sure this is in 4K. I've got a 4K capture card. I've got a camera that can do 4K. I want to make sure it's not doing 1080p. So I'm going to hit custom for resolution, and then I'm going to type in 3840. There we go. It autofills for me. I hit OK. And we notice that it's not working. Now, this is intentional here. This is a problem that a lot of people run into. Let's bring it back to device default so it goes back to 1080p. In fact, there's a handful of problems here. Another problem you'll notice is that even though I have this autofocus box around my face, it's not autofocusing. What's going on? Well, the first mistake that a lot of people make is they forget to put the camera in video mode. I'm in photo mode right now. If I switch it to video, and give it a little second. Here we go. Now we got a video mode. And if I go back into here, I can go to custom. And now I know I'm in 4K because it's working this time. And also you can see I'm still in focus. And I'm still in focus. That's what we're looking for. At the end of this video, once we're done with all of our settings here, we're actually going to save this to a custom mode. You'll notice a lot of cameras have a little dial up here right on top of the camera, and there's a C1, a C2, sometimes a C3. Those are custom settings that you can save specific settings for. So we're going to create a profile for streaming with all the settings we need for streaming, and we're going to save it to that one. That way, if you change the settings later, all you have to do is switch back to C1, and all of your settings go right back to your streaming settings that you set up. Now, the next main problem we need to address is the fact that we have all this stuff on the screen. We need something called clean HDMI. And most cameras nowadays do clean HDMI. This was a problem 10 years ago when this wasn't really a thing people did. Nowadays, every camera comes with clean HDMI. So I'm going to adjust the settings. I know where they are in my Panasonic or my Lumix camera. HDMI rec output info display. I'm going to turn it off. It's something similar on every camera like Sony's and Canon's. I'll put an image. I'll put images down here, right here, right now. Grab a screenshot for you. Sony on this side, Canon on this side. That way, if you're looking for that setting, you can't find it. You can find it in those settings. But now all those little numbers that you had around the screen, they're just on the little screen over here on the camera. They're not sending out to my Twitch stream anymore, but I'm going to put them back on so you guys can actually see what I'm doing. I'm doing this backwards, by the way. I have to reach behind the camera to set these. So be a little patient with me with some of these. So this part we're getting into here can feel a little bit overwhelming. There are a lot of settings on this camera, and if you're a little bit scared about it, I understand. It's totally normal, but I want you to know there's nothing to be scared of. There are only 4 settings that you need to know about going into this. That's it. 4 settings after the last one. So if you talk about clean HDMI, 5 settings. But from here on forward, 4 settings. In fact, I'm going to count them here on the camera for you. We have 1 setting here, 2, 3, and 4. Ignore everything else on your camera. Let's start with the top up here. First thing we need to start with is the camera resolution and the frame rate. Do you want to do 1080p? Do you want to do 4K for the resolution? Or for the frame rate, do you want to do 30 or do you want to do 60? There are a couple reasons why you might choose different ones. The default that a lot of people use is 1080-60. This is because a lot of webcams do 1080-60. This is also because Twitch streams by default are 1080-60, so your camera will match your gameplay. For my streams, I actually do 4K 30. I know this says 6K up here, but that's just a Lumix thing. It's actually only outputting 4K to my capture card. But I do 4K 30 because I spend a lot of time in just chatting with this camera angle right here, and I like my live streams to look kind of like my YouTube videos. Look a little bit more cinematic, that 30 frames instead of the over high frame rate 60 frames per second. And then by doing 4K, I've got a higher quality stream. And if I want to stream to YouTube, or I can stream in 4K, or Twitch is coming out with 1440p and even 4K streams soon here, I'll be able to do that. So here in my camera, I'm going to go up to the camera setting up here. I'm going to go to the little film strip and I can see my recording quality here, and I can choose all the different camera qualities that my camera can do. And I'm going to keep mine here. It's streaming in 4K 30. I guess I might as well actually tell you why I do 6K. 6K is that taller footage that I was telling you about. You can actually see on this shot that there are black bars on the left and right because it's taller. It doesn't fit all. If I were to, I could stretch it out. But I'm cropping off the top and the bottom a little bit. And you can see if I go back to this camera and I move it around, you can actually see it is tall with the black bars on the left and right. Let's just undo that. There we go. I just stretched it out to fill the whole screen. Let's bring this back to where it was. There we go. Now just so you can see how this works, I choose to do this taller format, even though it doesn't fit in a normal 16:9 frame. I choose to do this and kind of fit it in there like that, because then over here on my vertical canvas, which is how we do recording TikToks while I'm live, or how I can go live on TikTok at the same time, if I want to add in this exact same camera, which we called my camera, because the footage is taller, I have more footage here. You can see on this screen, it's chopping it off right at this light right here, but you can see we got extra space up here and down below down here, when normally I would be stretched in like this and not fitting as well in the screen. So now I can shrink it down and I'm a little bit more comfortable here now. I fit in the frame a little bit better because I can use that taller footage. So there is no right or wrong resolution. It entirely depends on your needs, what you care about most. Let's bring this back to the way it was. But let's move on down to these three numbers down here. So these three numbers are going to change the quality of your image. It's going to control things like how much static, like maybe over here, you notice that there's more static or noise on the wall compared to this camera where it's a little smoother. It's also going to control how blurry the background is, how well lit you are. All three of these are technically lighting settings. They just control the lighting in three separate ways. This one is called the shutter speed, this one is called the aperture, and this one is called the ISO. Let's do these one at a time. You're going to start with the aperture. Now the aperture is like the iris of your lens. Your iris can open and shut depending on how bright what you're looking at is. Well, same thing goes for a camera. Now, right now, these are set to automatic, which a lot of cameras will be. You can see it changing just by covering the lens a little bit. I'm going to set this to manual. Right now it's P for program auto. I'm going to go down to M for manual. And now you can see if I turn this dial here, we get the aperture changing. If I turn this dial here, the shutter speed is changing. If I turn this dial, I can change the ISO. And if I go down to the bottom of ISO, it automatically switches back to auto. Let's start with the aperture. As a general rule, most streamers want this number to be as low as possible, and it's probably the same for you. The lower the number, the wider open the aperture is, and that does two things for you. First thing it does is it adds in more light to your scene. A lot of times gaming spaces are kind of dark. You want to let as much light into your camera as you can. That's what's going to eliminate some of this static noise thing over here. The second thing it does is the wider open that it is, the more blurry the background is. So as I open this from f8 to f1.8, which is the widest open that this lens can go, watch something in the background. Maybe watch this, this play button back here. Let's go, ready? Look how blurry that gets. Obviously we're letting in more light, so we're also getting, I'm getting blown out here, but you can see how blurry that got. If we close that back up, take a look at this. Look at that. You could probably read that at this point. Let's open it back up again. It's going to get bright. So even though it's a little bit too bright, and we'll fix that in a little bit, you'll notice that we're not getting as much static over here in the corner either. That's because we're letting a ton of light in. When we close it up, look at that. Looks like what happens when you set your TV screen to channel 3 or whatever that was. Remember that? All right, let's open that all the way up, and then we're gonna adjust this one as well. This is our shutter speed. So the way a camera works is it's recording 30 frames every single second. This determines how long that frame is recording. So right now, each frame is 1/50th of a second. Now, if we were to crank this down to 1/200th of a second, that frame is only recording for a fraction of the time of the last one, so it doesn't let in as much light. But if we have 30 frames in a second, the widest open that we can get it is 1/30th of a second. Now you can see we're getting real bright here. A camera rule that most video makers go by is that you want your shutter speed to be half of the frame rate. So if we have 30 frames per second, we want our shutter to be open for 1/60th of a second. And the reason we do that is it gives you the most natural motion blur. The longer the lens is open, the more movement you get per frame. And if you leave it open too long, you get kind of a blurry mess anytime someone moves. However, with streaming, there's not a lot of rapid movement happening here, and usually your room is pretty dark. So if you're in a really dark space, it's not blowing up like this, you're at 1/60, and it still just looks too dark, I would recommend going to 1/30 and give yourself double the amount of light inside your camera. If you don't need it, like I clearly don't, I'm gonna go down to 1/60. So we have our aperture, we have our shutter speed. The last one is the ISO. And the reason we do this one last is because it's just basically a digital brightness. It's like you open up the picture on your phone that you've already taken and you mess with the brightness slider. And if any of you have ever taken a dark photo and tried to brighten it up, you know it still doesn't look very good, which is why we do this last. You try to get as much light in your camera with these first two settings first, and then you do whatever you have to at the end with this one. Actually, I would say before you get to cranking up the ISO, turn on your lights a little bit more. But if you have these set at their brightest settings, your light is as bright as you ever want to deal with it while you're gaming, this is your last resort. Now, clearly mine is too bright, so I have a couple options. I can either lower my ISO. Unfortunately, in the settings that I am at, 640 is actually the lowest I can go, which means I can close up my aperture or my shutter speed. I think I'd actually go for the shutter speed because I'm not doing a lot of movement. The motion blur doesn't really matter, and I would rather keep the background blur. So I'd like to keep that background blur back there and close up that shutter speed. But there is one other option. It's a little bit more advanced that we don't have to get into. But the last option is something called an ND filter, which is actually just a dark filter that goes over the camera and allows us to perfectly balance the brightness. But now we've set everything. We've set our resolution, our frame rate, we've set our shutter speed, our aperture, and our ISO, and we have a perfectly functioning live stream camera. The last thing we need to do is set this to a custom mode. So I'm gonna go into here, I'm gonna hit this little wrench over here, and you can see save to custom mode. And I'm gonna save this to custom mode 1. I'm gonna say yes, I wanna overwrite whatever was there originally. Be careful about that. And now, if I break something, let's say I go to a different setting here. Maybe I go back to my regular camera settings. Wait for it to turn back on. There we go. We crank up the ISO, we change the shutter speed and the aperture, and everything's messed up. We don't remember what we had. Well, I can just go back to custom mode 1, and look at that. 1.8, 1/60, and 640 ISO. Can we add something into the ISO, by the way? Depending on how good your camera is, different cameras can crank up ISO further than others without starting to really lose image quality. But I would suggest trying not to go above 2000 on your camera. I think anywhere below 2000 is generally a safe area. So let's turn off that info display. There we go. But we've still got one more thing to talk about, something I told you I would talk about at the beginning of this, and that is choosing A lens. It's going to be a lot easier to explain this now that you understand how something like an aperture works. You saw that my aperture on that camera went all the way down to f1.8. That is the aperture of a very good lens. This lens actually up here, the main one, only goes down to f2.8, which is why you notice the background is not as blurry. But if you're out deciding to upgrade your camera, you want to choose a particular lens, there are two really only things you need to know. First is this number here. This is the focal length. This one is a 24mm lens. It's so important that this is how they name lenses. The one on here is a zoom lens. It is a 14. This is 14 up to 24. That focal length is specifically talking about the zoom, or how wide or narrow the camera field of view is. So the lower the number, the wider it is. The higher the number, the further the zoom. Makes a lot of sense. Generally, lenses that zoom, especially lenses that zoom a lot, can't get as low in the aperture. So if you're looking for the blurriest background, you want something like a prime lens that doesn't zoom. This is only a 24mm lens, but it goes all the way down to f1.8. You get a real nice background blur. We shoot all our videos on prime lenses. So lenses are defined by those two things. The focal length or the zoom, you decide how wide you want your shot to be, and then the aperture, or how low or wide that iris gets. And the wider the iris gets, the more expensive the lens can get. It sounds weird, but the difference between a 1.8 lens and a 1.4 lens can be double the price. But I think we're done here. That's it. We got another video coming up in the next couple weeks to add on to this masterclass. This has been episode 5. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you guys in the next one. Happy streaming. Oh, hit the like button if you haven't yet, because it helps out a lot. And subscribe for the next one. And leave a comment for engagement. Maybe just put your favorite emoji. Bye.